2023 has been the year of change in Counter-Strike, mostly because of the release of CS2, but also how the landscape has shifted in the esports scene. Throughout the year, Tier 2 players have put their best foot forward to be part of the professional conversation, and through select events offering a platform, mostly the Paris Major, more teams and organisations have broken through this year than possibly any year before. Over the course of 2023, I've had the chance to follow some of the rises of these teams and have spent some time on this channel trying to bring to light the stories of those that surged into the zeitgeist. And now that the year is almost over, I wanted to take a look back and update their journeys, and go back and cover the teams who I couldn't cover at the time. I've been selective with who makes it into this video today based on how interesting their year has been and how long it takes to get up to speed. So if you're wondering where your favourite is, they're worth their own video. This video is also exclusive for the teams and not individual players, because between that Rainwaker update and the gushing over Jim Pat and Donk that I'll be doing, this will become a feature film. So with that said, I've curated this list of 5 of Counter-Strike's breakout squads of 2023, and I'd like to tell you about their background, how they rose to prominence, and where they are today. Nine were the team that made the first move to break through this year, so much so that the first in my brief introduction series of videos was focused on them. Nine had re-entered CSGO with a new Polish lineup, and whilst establishing themselves in the Tier 2, weren't at the level of success of a breakthrough team. That changed at the very start of 2023 with the signing of their new AWPer Hades following his stint on ENCE. The signing was the springboard for Nine to find a successful early year, placing high in online competition and eventually qualifying for 3 significant tournaments on the calendar: Blast Showdown, the Paris EU RMR, and IEM Rio. When we left them in April, they had set their sights on the RMR, having just played out the Showdown, where they took an upset win over Fnatic's relatively new lineup before pushing big the distance in the semis, but ultimately coming up short. The caliber that they played up to was not world-beating, but it was encouraging enough where wins over the Tier 1.5 and 2 squads would be enough to make it to the Major. With names like ENCE, Eternal Fire, and Monte in the mix, there are a number of rife opponents that could prove to be easy targets. Yet Nine wouldn't get an easy draw, and surpassed even the elevated expectations they were now held to. First round against G2, not a problem. Revenge against Big, it's a dish best served cold. Both best of ones, of course, but conceding no maps in the qualifying match against Vitality? Now that's a victory to celebrate. Nine certainly lived up to the hype in Copenhagen, but faced difficulties in Rio, where the tests against Heroic and NIP saw them leave in the group stage. Their momentum had fully fizzled out come time in Paris, going out 0-3 in the Legend stage at the hands of Liquid, GamerLegion, and FaZe. The run still earned them valuable ranking points and allowed several opportunities, such as qualifying for Gamers 8 and earning invites to IEM Cologne and ESL Pro League. However, none of these events yielded runs like the RMR, and Nine would stay within the Tier 1 periphery without taking centre stage. Results in the Tier 2 atmosphere never recovered either, even with requalification to the Blast Showdown. Given no other choice, the team would make changes to improve on their dwindling position, benching IGL Minio for a new youngster called Jacob, and handing IGL reins off to Hades. But even this wasn't enough to capture lower level titles like Yala Compass or the last ever ESL Polish Championship. With few options to get Nine back to winning ways, it felt like the project hit a dead end, and we're looking down the barrel of significant changes for the new year. However, changes came a lot sooner than we thought, and perhaps not the ones that we expected. In the wake of ENCE's own roster collapse, the organisation was also looking at a rebuild and moved to acquire the core of Nine to play alongside new IGL Glaive and fellow Paul Dia. To be honest, whilst I have faith in ENCE's team management abilities, this is a move that leaves more questions than answers. This new core hasn't been deep in a tournament since their initial breakout, which makes you wonder which of these players were right to save. One could have faith in Glaive, considering his position as a GOAT contender IGL, but as decorated as he is, this will be his first team that's not fully Danish. On top of that, he's the only player who's not Polish in this roster, adding a further layer to potential communication problems. You can see a world where this team can either achieve success or fail spectacularly, and if it's successful, it will take time and possibly a few more moves before the team reaches its final form. For Nine, what's left behind is a benched IGL, a solid veteran piece, and a new rising star. The core of a new team is there, assuming Minio wants to come back, and it won't be the first time that Nine have rebuilt. Last time they changed their identity to the Polish squad, so one has to wonder if their approach would be to start again and venture to another scene. To find some capacity of success is well within their remit. Reaching the same level they did this year? Perhaps, but I'm doubtful. Breach is a team that I also covered earlier on this year. Back then, the UK org had picked up a new roster who started under Orgless Heroes, a UK core of players with a little international spice who established themselves as a Tier 2 contender. Over spring, they had tried to build upon their contender status through online cups before qualifying for the RMR and making the most miraculous of runs, becoming the first ever UK core to make it to a CSGO major. In retrospect, that RMR run was rather weak, with very little Tier 1 competition facing them, and the only best of 3 win being over a team called Bait. Their achievement in terms of climbing the ladder was well established, but heading into the major, even though some of us hoped, nobody really expected much out of them. ITB would ensure that the faithful were well rewarded in Paris. Entering the major as legends gave them props up by default, and immediately set about taking wins in the best of ones, particularly over FaZe and ENCE. In the best of threes, ITB was set up with 2 chances to make it to the arena, and their efforts initially were valiant. Team Liquid were pushed into overtime on their own map pick, but by a margin of 2 rounds, still took over the game and regrouped for map 2 to take the series in 2-0. The match against Fnatic had its own emotionally charged background, with the UK core taking on the nation's most successful player, Mezzi, who came into Paris with several S-tier appearances and a LAN title under his belt. These successes gave Fnatic the upper hand on paper, and certainly the series start echoed this, with ITB's pick of Inferno falling apart. However, their tenacity to fight back from the rear has to be commended, and it led to a bounce back that decimated Fnatic on the last 2 maps of the series, sending them home and ITB to the Accor Arena. This would mark another landmark achievement for ITB, the first UK team to attend and top 8 a major. Whilst individuals have done this before, they were part of larger international projects and never together on the same squad. Heading into the playoffs against the home field favourites Vitality was never going to be an easy task, and despite valiant efforts to keep things close, ultimately the eventual champions dispatched of ITB to close out their tournament run. Having surpassed all expectations time and again, ITB caught so many eyeballs in their run, and certain players were being eyed up for future moves. Whilst they would stay together for some last hurrahs in the months that followed, come the summer player break, the time came for the youngsters to spread their wings and leave the nest. Volt found greener pastures on GamerLegion, who themselves lost players to Tier 1 squads, while Cypher left to join the new TSM project. ITB, meanwhile, were left with the task of rebuilding their roster, but with the core now much more diverse and UK talents not being as available as before, the UK identity was no longer viable. As such, they adopted the identity of the Second Chance Saloon, with the next wave of signings featuring players that had Tier 1 exposure but were down on their luck as of late. Bemis was made famous on FaZe and MOUZ in the online era, but was ousted from MOUZ in favour of their academy call-ups in 2022. Neofrag had broken out on OG, but that team as a whole wasn't able to achieve much in the top level. Masuta spent over 2 years on Vitality, but was only able to go so far with Team Falcons, and Kicker was a major champion IGL that had been benched by his team for not converting on their success in Rio. Not everyone here was a hit, and generally ITB continued slaving away in the online scene with a couple of low placements in S-tier competitions. Even after getting a couple of good tournaments near the tail end of this year, the bright future that ITB might have had with trialist IGL Body was snatched away by Fnatic. As of late, ITB brought back Thomas, the captain for the new year, having been in the team as a substitute for some time. Considering his achievements in the year, and now armed with arguably more proven talents than before, overall there are enough elements that there should be some success within this team. But the surgence from the major seems unreplicable, and the hometown talents that they had produced are now a thing of the past. This is now the backup plan for players that have nowhere else to go. It's said on paper that they should do decent things. Whether they can achieve them in 2024? Well, that's in the hands of the king. Apeks isn't a name that I would have expected to be within the top of Tier 2 level. Traditionally, they've been known for fielding Norwegian teams without much relevance, but starting in 2021, they began making moves to bring in more Scandinavian elements. By 2023, they had gone fully international and left behind an ambitious yet unsuccessful project with French legend Shox. JL and Kixan had been the New Year additions, and the team were making a crack at 2023. However, whatever achievements they had seemed outshined by literally anybody else. The online outings had a couple of deep runs in CCTs that showed off some of the potential of this team, but nothing that caught the eye like Monte had. The RMR led to successful qualification with a 3-2 Swiss record, but the headlines and discussion was all about ITB and GamerLegion. Then in the major, they achieved great things. Their Challengers run had its highlights, specifically beating Liquid in round 1 and pressing G2 quite far in their best of 3, and the Legends stage had back and forth matches, with the round 5 best of 3 ending with a win over NIP to qualify for the playoffs. It's there that Apeks outlasted Liquid in a quarter-final to remember for the org before getting dispatched by eventual champions Vitality. A respectable run when looked at in isolation, but with GamerLegion going one better making it to the grand final, all eyes were once again drawn away from Apeks. During the summer they would lose JL to Na'Vi, leaving many wondering if their time was up. Certainly, with invites to the top-tier events coming out with shallow runs and the online circuit results returning to hit and miss, that seemed to be the case. Coming into December and their last appearances of the year, Apeks were very far down the pecking order when compared with their field of competition. However, at this point, the groundwork Apeks had laid had finally begun to solidify. First of all, much earlier in the year, the team made a winning run at the Elisa Invitational just before the summer player break, and through that had earned a spot at the end-of-year Elisa Masters Espo LAN event. They also made a lower bracket run through the ESL Challenger Atlanta qualifier, having taken out Movistar Riders and Forza on the way to the spot in the last LAN of the year. It was in these two events that Apeks would resurge. Elisa Masters was set to be a story of just two teams, Complexity and MOUZ. With their recent days seeing a fair amount of success, both teams were expected to make it to the grand final, and both teams were in Apeks' group. MOUZ was their first opponent. The opening games were best of ones, and Apeks were pushed quite the distance in double overtime, which they ultimately were victorious in. Meanwhile, Furia toppled Complexity, setting them up as Apeks' opponent in the group winners match, a match which Apeks dominantly won, taking the group in first. They would go on to become the villains of Espo, taking down Finland's greatest organisation, ENCE, in the semi-finals, one of two Finnish-represented teams. With ENCE's roster beginning to fall apart at this point, Apeks were set up to dish out the hurt with another perfect series in their run. At last, they were in the finals of a tournament, and one where the two favourites were out long before. Apeks were now well within title contention, and with veterans like Jacob hungry for a title win in his 4th arena stage appearance, this was their chance to go further than they had ever gone before. But revenge is a dish best served in Finnish cold, with Brazilian spice. Furia stood on the opposite side of the grand final, having beaten MOUZ in the group decider and Havu in the semi-finals. And this Furia wanted this rematch to be nothing like the first go-over. In the best of 5, elements on the Apeks side went missing to start, and despite a map 2 that extended the series, Furia were far too strong and wiped the floor with them to become the masters of Espo. And Atlanta told a similar story, with Apeks topping out their group and taking a semi-final win over title contenders Monte. However, in the final against Virtus Pro, when it mattered most, Apeks fell apart. With dire showings on both maps, VP stood in the foreground with yet another ESL Challenger title. And as a final bonus Christmas present, Kixan, the IGL that brought them this far, departed the team for a new heroic project, leaving Apeks broken and their future uncertain. Despite their efforts this year, they are the team that time will forget. The ones who put their best foot forward and were still outshone. Forever the bridesmaid, and never the bride. GamerLegion was the breakout team of the Paris Major, with a run that only Gambit can compare to, except being done on LAN. You could technically say that GamerLegion's latest roster broke out last year, with a smaller run in the Rio Major cycle, ousting G2 from the tournament in one of the greatest upsets of the year. Coming into 2023, they were a team on a mission, having engaged in the online scene with 2 titles won in 5 finals over 6 different tournaments. Qualifying for the RMR was a given, and with one best-of-1 loss against their record, the competency to make it through the RMR was expected, despite some controversy with the tiebreakers against Into the Breach. But everyone knows that this team's main success came in Paris, Entering the major as challengers, GamerLegion looked set to initially disappoint, set up for elimination by losing the first 2 rounds to Complexity and the Mongols. However, in the best of 3 games, GamerLegion rose to the task by ousting Mouse in the midst of their poor start to the year, dispatching of OG, who still hadn't found any success, and taking away Forza's last chance at major progress. Then, in the Legend stage, GamerLegion's initial Swiss was spoiled by Na'Vi in round 1, but from there it felt like easy enough pickings. Nine's reign of terror was ended in part to a win from the GamerLegion camp, Fnatic was set on their own awkward path in round 3, and the team let 15 total rounds go against Apeks in a whole best of 3 match. Their finest hour was the incredible showing in the Accor Arena, with another rising squad, Monte, being the favourites in the quarterfinals. The stage aspect seemed to get to the Ukrainian core, and they struggled to catch up on their own map pick, were blown out of the water on GamerLegion's home turf as they took 2-0 in the series. The semi-final against Heroics should have been where GamerLegion's run ended. The Danes were among the tournament favourites and were expected to meet Vitality in the grand finals. GamerLegion had other ideas, however, ideas of an upset to add to their growing list. With the French crowd behind the underdogs, magic was in the air that night, with a close loss on their map pick of Ancient not slowing them down. Barely edging Heroic out on Inferno led to the complete collapse of the Danes by map 3. 16-6 sent Acadian's crew out of the major and GamerLegion to the major finals. The efforts of GamerLegion by this point were worthy of praise, but victory over Vitality was a fantasy that would not be fulfilled. Vitality would lift the last CSGO major trophy, with GamerLegion still holding their heads high at what they'd achieved. Much like Into the Breach, GamerLegion's team would lose some of the most important elements during the summer player break. Imma was the first to fall, with Na'Vi calling on him to be part of the reforms that would build their current international squad. With Mouse's main team falling flat in the first half of the year, the decision to supplement their academy call-ups with their old academy IGL Shui was a no-brainer at this point. Their replacements would be Volt from Into the Breach thanks to his stellar performance in Paris, and Neelan from Evil Geniuses, whose captaincy would later be taken up by Polish veteran Snacks. Like all of the teams in this video, GamerLegion's surge to the top has given them valuable ranking placements to earn invitations to multiple Tier 1 events. It's among this Tier 1 presence that they've foregone the Tier 2 grind in favour of exclusively playing the top brass LAN tournaments. Certainly a sensible move on the surface, but many of these events haven't seen deep runs, with the group exits in IEM Cologne and Sydney and the ESL Pro League. Even Tier 1.5 events like the Elisa Masters, Espo, Betboon, Dacia, and both of the ESL Challenger LANs saw group stage and even last place exits from GamerLegion. Their ranking is in free fall as a result, and whilst they still maintain invites to IEM Katowice and the PGL RMRs next year, they have gone down to the play-in levels from the direct group stage at Cologne this year. And without a partner spot, some of these invites may be in jeopardy if they can't turn their results around soon. To do some quick theoretical analysis, I put GamerLegion's hard times down to the loss of their IGL. While Snacks is an experienced player, Shui's eye for the bigger picture can't be understated. Between the incredible Mouse NXT Academy titles, this stint on GamerLegion, and the success upon returning to Mouse in recent months, it's clear he's a capable captain. Losing him, I think, was the greatest setback that GamerLegion have suffered, and in my eyes, there's a world where if he stayed, they'd be well poised going into 2024, but that's a story for another video. For now, GamerLegion continues to stagnate with no signs of recovery to end the year, signalling that whilst this team might still exist, the party is over. It's quite weird to say that Monte were a breakout team this year, considering that they're well within the top 10 currently, and they've been within the top 15 for most of the year. Their 2022 was nowhere near the level they're playing at now, with some okay online placements here and there, but mostly at an ESEA advanced and similar level. Monte started 2023 by shaking up their leadership, bringing in SDY off the back of his stand-in tenure on Na'Vi. Now reinvigorated, the team set about hitting the grindstone, playing in every single tournament they could enter: EUPL, EDC, CCT, You name it, they were in it. As the early year progressed, Monte were finding themselves moving on from the third-tier competitions and constantly placing in stopgap events like CCT Playoffs, Elisa Invitationals, and the ESL Challenger League. ECL Season 44 was a title victory for Monte, a sign of things to come with qualification to Pro League being one of the competition's prizes. That was one of 3 online tournaments that Monte had won that March, an impressive record to lead into the Paris RMR. Monte made it to 4th in RMR B, defeating fellow Tier 2 squad Forza and losing to Vitality in a 3rd place decider. In the time between the RMR and the Major, Monte continued to spool up the online results, adding 2 more grand finals and succeeding in the open qualifiers around this time. The Major run saw them take their challengers win over minor region squads, with Fluxo, Mongols and Pain falling in the trail of Monte. The Legend stage looked similarly confident, with wins over Furia and Fnatic, and a loss to eventual champions Vitality leading to a stomping 2-0 over countryman Na'Vi to go to the stage at the Accor Arena. As I discussed before, the arena jitters may have set Monte off kilter against GamerLegion, and they fell without a map in the playoffs, ending their major in the top 8. So far in this video, a lot of emphasis has been placed on the Paris Major, since this is where all of these teams found their prominence. But if it sounds like I'm glossing over Monte's major run, well, there's a reason for this. This video is designed to explore both how each of these teams broke out and where they are now. And whilst many of the teams on this list had their best moments in Paris, I think the more interesting discussion for Monte is their time after the Major. Take this visual demonstration. This is a ranking chart plotting HLTV's rankings over 2023. The blue line represents GamerLegion and the red line is Monte. The yellow line marks the ranking update after the Major. Whilst GamerLegion's grand final initially spiked higher, you'll notice that they have petered off as the year has gone on. However, Monte has not only sustained but improved their post-Major rank, ending the year with their highest historical ranking to date. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. As I mentioned earlier, GamerLegion chose to limit their event appearances to only the S-tier lands after Paris, but Monte went right back to the grindstone, returning to the same events that brought them notoriety before the Major cycle. This obviously would aid rankings directly, but along with that, I think there's a much more direct gameplay effect. I believe that one of the reasons that Tier 2 teams are doing so well at the moment is because their fundamentals are well polished, leaving sharp individuals firing on all cylinders and very few errors that can be punished without meeting them head on. And that leads to my second reason. Monte was still receiving the same top tier invites as everybody else, and those fundamentals led to better finishing positions. Events like Thunderpick and Rubet saw top 4 and grand final finishes, and the ESL Pro League was their crowning achievement, where Monte eliminated Heroic, Fnatic, Complexity and Vitality on their way to the semis. With their grind mentality leading to ESL Challenger LAN events at the tail end of the year, this would prove to be the perfect opportunity for some silverware. With a win at DreamHack Winter and a top 4 placement in Atlanta, Monte would end the year ranking just as highly as GamerLegion did when they made the Major final. And that's in the face of a summer roster move that I honestly forgot to talk about whilst writing the first draft of this script because of how little it derailed the team. With Boros being their superstar throughout the year, even nearly breaking top 10 players in the Major, being acquired by Falcons at the time felt like putting the last block out of Monte's Jenga tower. It should have ended Monte, and the acquisition of Bro from the generally lackluster Astralis talent didn't feel like the kind that would fill Boros' boots. But that move highlighted the rest of the team's strengths, with the slacks being picked up by Wara2K and SDY becoming the dynamic duo that has kept Monte growing. The level they performed at is one of the best in Tier 2 history, and whilst any team can fall apart at a moment's notice, I'm thinking that they'll carry on in the year to come. I'm a commentator. It's my job to entertain, and I entertain through the stories told in the matches on my screen. One of the criticisms I've always taken note of in my work is this notion that guys like us overhype these teams. And I have to ask, how? In the UK, our favourite sport is football, and we have one of the most popular leagues in the world, the Premier League. Yet despite that, a good portion of domestic fans actively prefer the Championship, our second-tier league, under the belief that it's more competitive. And certainly, without the same financial protections that the Premier League clubs benefit from, and the simultaneous prospects of falling into irrelevance or surging to the promised land, Championship football has produced some of the most iconic moments in the sport's history. With partner leagues going away after 2024, perhaps this won't be as much of a pain point, but in this current era of Counter-Strike, I hope that that mentality comes across in this video. From a story perspective, there's so much to sink your teeth into. The euphoria of standing on the greatest stage in our game only to look back and realise it was a fleeting 15 minutes of fame. The tragedy of being so good, but never quite good enough. The journey of the rising stars who took control of their own destiny and pressed forward until nobody could deny them their plaudits. These are the teams that captured my heart in 2023. And already there are multiple squads making their presence felt for the new year. Between the stalled success of Prison Lion, the rising CIS squads of BetBoom and Spirit, or even a freak run from a courageous underdog like Harvu, there are many teams looking to make their mark as we speak. So to them, I look forward to seeing you down the road. And to you all, I wish you a happy holiday and a fantastic 2024.